Hi there, this video will demonstrate how to create some type animation in After Effects. So I have a composition already created, and we're just going to start by creating some simple text in our composition. Here's our horizontal type tool. There's also, if you hold down left click, the vertical type tool. So if I click the horizontal type tool and click and drag, I can type in something like hi there, and we get my select tool, move it down so we can see it. My size is already much higher, so I'll come back and I can adjust that later. What I wanted to show you is that we can also just drag this down some for the size in pixels. You can also create vertical text. If I hold down left click on my text tool and change it to the vertical type tool, when I click now, I am typing vertically. So I can type the same thing, but now it's a vertical text. So if you want to animate or create text vertically or horizontally, the type tool can allow you to do that. We're just going to do a horizontal text for right now. So you can come in here in the character tab on the right side, and you can change the type of font. It gives you a preview of what you might want this to look like. So any font that's already on your computer, you can easily come in here and change that. I'm going to change this back to the one that has as default here. So it's kind of like a script text. You can also change the font color, the big box to the right of it, or square is the font color. So if you want it to be red or gray or dark or whatever you want to do, you can change the font color pretty easily there. And then you can drag up and down the text size. This is in pixels. One thing to know that this is actually a vector font, just like any other kind of font tool. So letters are drawn so that you can scale it up and down and it doesn't affect the quality, although we are increasing or decreasing the pixel size of it. We also have leading, kerning, and tracking. Kerning is turned off right now from metrics to optical, but the leading, if I continue typing in here, leading is vertical spacing, so you can change how close to different lines after return the text is. And then tracking is the spacing in between the letters on the entire word. Okay, so that evenly spaces the letters further apart or closer together. So you can play with that. Those are some basic font adjustments. You can play with some of these other settings down here for basic font. We have like a bold, we have italicized, we have a couple other variations, all caps if we wanted to, small caps, and then if each font has a specific style to it, this one does not, then you could change the font style up here as well, regular, bold, italicized, whatever else you might want to add. So that's the font creation. Okay, so what we're going to do is talk about a bunch of different effects here, and I'm going to introduce a couple, and then we will talk about some different varieties here. So a couple of them that we can add in the effects drop down. There's a couple ways we can add effects. We can go to the drop down with that layer selected and add an effect this way. We can actually right click on the layer and go to effects and add it this way. Or if I have the layer selected, there's an effects and presets tab, and select the preset this way, or an effect. If you use an effect or want to add an effect from the effects and presets tab, you're going to have to click and drag this into or onto your layer. So let's do blur and then Gaussian blur. If you drag this onto the layer, that will add that effect this way. But if you have the layer selected, if you right click or go up to the effect drop down and add the same effect, it'll add it that way. So there's a couple different ways to add an effect. So with this Gaussian blur effect, you can blur it over time. So you can have it so maybe put in a value really high, 400. There you go. So that really blurs it so we can't even see anything. And then we're going to hit the stopwatch. If something has a stopwatch value or an attribute has a stopwatch beside it, that means we can animate it. So I can turn on my stopwatch to keyframe that and move my time around. And then let's put our blurriness back to 0. So then over that time, it'll fade in. So So we can make it quicker. And we can also go to the effects tab underneath our layer and keyframe this to kind of pause it and have a much faster kind of on off. There we go. So the blur can be animated as well. It's a way to kind of focus text if you wanted to. If you want to get rid of a effect, you select that effect in the layers panel and then just delete that out, and the text layer will still be there, but the effect is now gone. So we can add a bunch of other effects to this. We can play around with the color. We can go to color correction, and let's just add a hue saturation, but take a look at all these different ones. Exposure, color balance, brightness. I'm just going to do hue saturation. So if you wanted to animate the colors changing, one thing we need to do first is actually add some color to this, because it's not going to work without color too well. I can keyframe my color channel range and then master hue, but right now if I change the master hue value, it's not going to do anything because I don't have any color. It's white. So if I change my color to red, if I put my master hue back at 0, that'll be the basic red color. And then over time, then we can change that color. So I can say green, and then at a later point with my time stopwatch selected, change it to blue. You can also do this much faster as well. So I'm changing the time, then changing the value, then changing the time, then changing the value. So over time, I can change between different colors as well. You can also do the same thing for saturation, brightness, and hue. So I can play around with each one of these as well. So hue saturation is kind of a good overall color change, but there's a lot of different ones. So you could also come in here, and there's like stylize and add a brush stroke stylization to this. Looks like it's kind of brushed on there. Distorts it some. Each one of these has like variations of them. So there's brush size, stroke length that you can play with, okay, stroke angle. So each one of these, once again, can be animated, or maybe this is just an effect you want to have to make it look like it's drawn on there. If you don't like a particular effect, there's a hue saturation one. I can delete that one out. And there's a brush stroke one. I can delete that one out if I didn't want that one either. So there are a lot of effects to play with. Color correction. There's a distort. So we can look at that one, and bulge. So we can say bulge height, horizontal radius, vertical radius. There you go. And then bulge amount. So we can have that at 0. And this could be like a breathing kind of motion. So stopwatch our bulge height. And then over time it could kind of breathe out or blow up. Go back down. Breathe out. Go back down. So over time you could have like a bulge effect or something like that. There's a lot of different options we can come through and add here with these effects. Distort has a lot of good variety to it. Noise has a good variety to it. Stylize. So the idea with some of these basic effects is to kind of play around and see what can work for your particular project. I'm going to delete out that bulge for right now. There we go. Alright, so we're back to kind of a red text. I'm going to make it back to closer to a white. Make it easier to see. Okay, so something else we can add is effects presets. So we have some animation presets here. I'm going to roll up, blur, and sharpen. But also all the other effects that we just talked about are listed here as well. There's also an animation presets, which are pre-created kind of procedural animation-based effects that we can add. So underneath animation presets, there's a bunch of other sections as well. I'm going to use the text one since we are animating text this time. Underneath text, there's a bunch we can play with as well. I'm just going to look at animate in for right now and play around with a couple of these different ones. So let's add drop in by character. I'm going to drag that on top of my text. It's going to go ahead and add that animation to my scene. So if I hit play, it's going to drop in that text from the top standpoint. Now I can come in here and look at my text options, and it creates an animator. And under range selector, here is my offsets here. So what is animating is this start value. So it means it's going to drop down, and from the start, from the left, it's going to drop the first letter and then move towards the right. There's also an end one as well, which will drop the letters from the right first. Oh, let's put 100 there. There you go. I also have position, so I can have this so that it starts higher. So this negative value up here makes it so it's going to start higher. Put it even more so we can't see the bottom of it. And then the letters are going to drop to the bottom standpoint, originally to the original standpoint of the letters, where the letters were to begin with. So we can say over time we can make that go faster as well. We can take that keyframe and move it towards the right. So that's a much faster drop in. And then maybe later, then it's going to use the end to drop this out. Let me turn my stopwatch on, kind of go back, and then we will add a value of 100 back to the end. So basically it'll drop in from the left to begin with, and then it will leave out from the right. Just one example. We could also change the position so it's actually starting from the bottom. So this is a vertical kind of drop in. There you go. So these are some really cool procedural presets here. I'm going to select that animator one and delete that one out. And we'll talk about a couple other ones. So there's some fades. Fade up by character. I guess it fades into the character, each character. You can layer these on top of one another as well. Fly in with a twist. So there's a fly in, similar way, but instead of just a drop in, it's a fly in. Random shuffle in. Let's try that one. Random shuffle. So randomly shuffle the letters in. And this is kind of a horizontal position. So I can move them off screen. And they randomly shuffle in. Pretty neat. There's fades. Spin in by character. Let's try that one. There's also a spin in by word. So we can play around with a bunch of those. There's a typewriter. So if I drag in typewriter, that's if I'm typing this on the keyboard. There you go. I can change that timing if I want it to go faster as well. Just go in here to those settings and move them around. If I want it to start and end later, maybe it waits for a second or two, then types it in fast. There's a bunch of options in here. We'll do, let's see, wipe in to center. There you go. So it wipes it in from outside. So the amount of effects and combinations are really limitless. There's a lot of different starting variation points. And we can layer them on top of one another as well. So there's some other things we can do. Let's see. Let's add our drop in again. And just to show you layering, put this all the way up top. Then it'll drop in. And then let's do spin by character. Let's try that as well. See what that does. So drop in, and then after that it's going to kind of spin the letters around and move them to a different location. So wherever my timeline cursor is, it's going to add that effect at that point. So I can remove that. If I want to put my spin by character at the beginning, I would move my timeline back to 0, drag spin by character in there. So now that's going to kind of come in, drop, and spin into place. So some of these will look better as you're blending, and some of them are better to add later on as well. So maybe at different times. There we go. So maybe afterwards, after it drops in. There you go. And then it can spin around. So we can add filters or effects on top of effects on top of effects. Could also go back and add like that Gaussian blur again. Find my Gaussian blur. There you go. So there's my effects. Well, we could do it up here. So maybe it starts off blurry as the letters are coming in. Then it's going to and fade in as they're transitioning maybe. Oh, I removed my keyframe there. Blur. There we go. And we'll put this back at 400. Let's see, so we'll key that again, and then maybe in between, we'll put our blur value back up. So we can layer on effects on top of effects. That's kind of another way we can do this. All right, so something else we can do is add like 3D motion to this as well. And although this is still going to be a 2D plane of text, I'm just going to remove this one out. We'll create another one. Do horizontal. There. It's still a 2D plane. We can turn on the ability to animate in 3 dimensions. So to do that, I can come in here with my hide there text layer and click on this button right here, this empty box, and that'll turn on 3D aspects, a little cube. So that turns on the 3D ability of this layer. I'm going to turn it off and I'll show you for a second. But I open up my transforms for this layer. Without that 3D cube turned on, I have 2 positional axes, X and Y. So there's horizontal, there's vertical. And then I have 2 for scale. They're linked together right now. So there's horizontal, there's vertical. Okay. And then I also have 1 for rotation, right? I can only rotate it in 1 axis here. So the moment I turn on my 3D setting for my layer, this is layer specific, then that gives me 3 axes for position, horizontal, vertical, and the third one's the depth axis, so X, Y, and Z, which as default it'll make the text look smaller or larger, but what I'm actually doing there is moving the text further away from the camera or closer to the camera. I also now have a third axis for scale. This is a 2D plane, so this doesn't have the defaults for, or no dimension to the plane. I also have rotation X, Y, and Z. So now I have rotate in 1 angle. In the X axis, there's Y. And then the default one that we had earlier is Z. So we can easily come in here and create what looks like 3D text at a different angle pretty easily. We can also animate this as well. So if I wanted to come in here and animate my text going around in 3 dimensions, it is important where your anchor point is. So my anchor point is default, it's right here in the bottom left. So I can move that kind of around, move it down to really the bottom corner there. Here we go. And then let's keyframe, let's see which one, rotate Y. That'll work. So we'll keyframe Y rotate. And then maybe every 2 seconds, we're going to add 1 full revolution. And I just type in 1 there. And then I'll rotate that all the way around. And then maybe after that, we can keyframe X. And then have X go 1 full revolution. So I can type in 360 to the right value, or I can type in 1 to the left value, and that'll rotate it in that axis. So that's another way that we can animate text, and that we can turn on 3D abilities to be able to animate in all 3 dimensions. So you can kind of see there's our angles. The red is X, the green is Y, the blue is Z. So that's kind of some of the things we can do there to kind of show motion in a different way. Okay, so the other thing we can do is actually animate the camera to see things in perspective, and animate the camera get closer, further away, and actually have camera adjustments as well, like depth of field, aperture, and things like that. So if I go to Layer, New, and Camera, this adds a camera component layer, and if I open up, I have transforms for my camera as well, and then I also have camera options. So there's zoom, depth of field, focus distance, aperture, blur levels, and these are all representative of real-world cameras. What I wanted to show is, let me just pull all these attributes back up. Let me copy my text layer here, and then maybe I'll get rid of these keyframes. Transform. I don't want any motion for these 2 right now. I just want to show you kind of depth because After Effects really does have a 3D scene, but we're only looking at it from a 2D point of view. So with that camera added, let's see, let me take one version of this and move my text in different areas. And we'll come back and move one of these texts back. But let's take our active camera in the composition, and I'm going to change that to top view. So if I zoom out, there's my camera and what my camera sees. Here's my composition still. My two text layers are here, so let me take one of my text layers and move it back in the z-axis. So I'm just going to move it way on back here. Okay. So from the active camera, that text that I just moved with this top right one, it makes it look smaller. And maybe we'll take the other one, go back to top view, and we'll move it closer. Uh-oh, I missed it there. There you go. Okay. So go back to active camera. It makes it look larger on the screen, but actually it's further away from the camera. So back in the top view, I can take my camera and open up my transforms and animate the position. So if I animate the position Z, that moves the camera closer. So I can keyframe position on frame 0, and then maybe have a 2-second animation and keyframe my camera moving closer to these objects. There you go. It's always going to point towards the center, so make sure you're aware of that as well. But now the camera moves. So my text is not moving, but my camera's moving. So if I go back to my composition, and we'll zoom in to see, if I drag my timeline down, it looks like the text is moving closer, but the text is actually staying still. The camera is the one that's animating. So now we have even further control over what our composition does. We can animate individual text or individual objects, we can add effects to them, and we can add camera motion as well. Okay, so we can come in here to like a camera options, change depth of field to on, and keyframe our focal distance. So we can play around with that. There we go. Okay, so what we can do is turn on depth of field on and focal distance. I'm going to turn stopwatch on for focal distance, and over that same time, maybe I'll change this to, let's do something lower, 400. There we go, so it's blurry. Maybe I'm not going to change that focal distance, but as you can see, the text gets closer, it's going to become more and more in focus. There you go. So I can change that distance, 600, try that. Here we go. So the text is blurrier the further away it is, and as it gets closer, it's going to come into focus. So you can kind of play around with that focal distance as well. And other things with the camera to animate the camera on top of our text layers or whatnot. Alright, so those are some different ways that we can create some animation with text. There's a bunch of effects and preset animations, and then also adding 3D camera controls and 3D motion controls to our composition. That'll wrap up this video on some basics of how to add some motion with text.